evening. I'm Teresa Skupic, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, May 28th. Following yesterday's historical throne speech delivered by King Charles III, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre delivered his reaction to the speech while speaking to reporters on Parliament Hill. He said that the speech included no real plan and took aim at the morbidly obese Liberal government's costs.
We join today in thanking His Majesty for coming to Canada and delivering the throne speech, reinforcing our ancient British liberties, a parliamentary system that goes back 800 years, a system that has served Canada well and has been the foundation of what I love to call the Canadian promise, that anyone who works hard gets a great life in a nice, affordable house on a safe street. That's the promise that we as Conservatives ran to restore. And we were looking for that promise and that hope in this speech today. We did see a lot of the right slogans and political talking points, but no clear plans to get it done. One slogan dealt with controlling government spending, but there were no specific savings to roll back the morbidly obese Liberal government's costs. We saw promises about getting things built, but no mention of oil and gas or pipelines. Pipelines are, of course, the thing we most need to build. Didn't get one mention. Nor did they mention getting rid of the anti-energy laws that have kept our resources in the ground. C-69, the no development law. C-48, the shipping ban. The energy cap. The electric vehicle mandate. All of these things were left out of the speech altogether. No specific plans to get anything done, even though, as the Prime Minister has said, we are in a crisis to break our dependence on the American economy. They mentioned crime, but refused to say that they would repeal the Liberal catch and release bail law, C-75, or the house arrest law, laws that have allowed rampant chaos and crime to overtake our once tranquil streets. No mention of overcoming the opioid crisis and replacing tax-funded drugs and legalization with treatment and recovery.
Mr. Poilievre was asked by reporters what impact the King delivering the speech has on Canada's sovereignty.
It's been a centuries-old debate between Canada's primary relationship with the Crown and with our closest neighbour. We saw that as far back as John A. Macdonald. We saw it again in the free trade debate. I think it is important to reinforce the British traditions of our parliamentary democracy and to reassert that we have a centuries-old friendship with the United Kingdom.
Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet also spoke on Parliament Hill, reacting to the throne speech that opened the 45th Parliament.
It is the most important initiative by a federal government towards centralization that I have seen or heard of. I do not believe it is ill-intended. I believe that Mr. Carney sees himself culturally as the CEO of Canada. And he will make decisions, and he will have his decisions being implemented by everybody. And he seems to see that Quebec and provinces are merely region offices. And I'm not mad at him now, and I intend not to be. It is the way it works where he comes from. This is not the way it works in this place, and it is not the way it works within this federation, as terrible as it might be for us. So my plan is to do what I promised to do during the campaign when we started going up again. We will meet next week. We will discuss in complete serenity, and I will try to find common grounds in order to work together, because the issue at the beginning of the campaign was the threat from Donald Trump. And in the speech, there's no such thing. It just vanished, disappeared. So we have to make it what it's supposed to be, adaptation for Quebec and Canada facing the threat from Mr. Trump.
Mr. Blanchet was asked whether or not he supports the NDP getting slots on committee or having time in the House for debate.
I will certainly not support any ideas such as the NPD having any seat in the committees, because it is our balance of power. I will protect it quite seriously. However, there might be conversation about the resources that might be devoted to them. It's not done with so much enthusiasm, but I believe that we have to say, okay, what is it you want? What's in it for the rest of us?
An interim NDP leader, Don Davies, highlighted some of the points of the throne speech that he agreed with, but also expressed disappointment over its lack of concrete commitments to address pressing issues such as healthcare and Indigenous housing.
I must say that there's nothing really new in the throne speech. It's essentially the policies that the Liberals have announced for the past several months and broad platitudes. I will say there are some positive indications in that throne speech that New Democrats can support. For example, we have long been supporters of building a strong, independent Canadian economy and supporting Canadian companies making Canadian goods and services and becoming champions on the global stage, creating good jobs here at home. And we also are very much in favor of building a diversified trade relationship so that Canada can take better advantage of exporting our goods and services with reliable trade partners and reducing our reliance on the United States. We also are also pleased to see a commitment to promote more internal trade between Canadian provinces and territories and to facilitate labor mobility. We think that'll help build a stronger domestic Canadian economy. And finally, I'm glad to see that housing is mentioned in the throne speech. New Democrats have for decades been advocating for the federal government to play a stronger role in creating the millions of affordable homes that Canadians need from coast to coast to coast. I will say, on the more negative side, this is not a worker-centered throne speech, and I'm also very concerned about what is not mentioned in the throne speech. For example, the words healthcare are absent from the throne speech. You won't find any reference to Indigenous housing, perhaps the most acute need for affordable housing in the country within that important demographic group. And also, we're not seeing any of the kinds of protections that we think Canadian workers need to have in the face of the threats that Donald Trump's tariffs present to our country. Finally, I'm, I think, most concerned about the economic message sent in this throne speech. Essentially, they're cutting revenue to the federal government and at the same time saying that they're going to keep spending to under 2%, which is the rate of inflation or maybe under inflation. That can only mean one thing for Canadians. It means a cut to the public services that Canadians rely on. And so we'll be working hard in the House to bring these messages to the floor of the House of Commons and advocating for the kinds of services that we need, the protections Canadian workers want and deserve, and to build the kind of Canadian economy that we know Canada is so capable of and that Canadians so richly deserve.
Mr. Davies lamented the government's failure to propose measures such as eliminating fossil fuel subsidies or adopting technologies to meet climate goals.
Part of becoming an energy superpower in the 21st century is becoming a leader in renewable energy and sustainable energy sources. You know, that's something we're going to have to watch carefully. I think, you know, Canadians want to see Canada meet our international obligations that we've signed, for instance, in Paris and other ways. I think Canadians are very concerned about, you know, our carbon emissions. And we're about to enter a season of where wildfires and floods have become the norm. And of course, there's a huge economic cost to not dealing with climate change in that context. So we're going to have to wait and see what the details are. You know, this budget was long on platitudes, short on details. And I think when we talk about such important issues, this is where we really have to focus our efforts and find out exactly what they mean by this.
Former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien missed King Charles delivering the speech because he is recovering after having a heart stent inserted, according to a spokesman. The spokesman said that the 91-year-old, normally a sociable presence at events like this, is expected to recover. The statement said Chrétien wasn't feeling well earlier this week, so he went to the hospital for tests and had a stent inserted Tuesday. Former Prime Ministers Justin Trudeau, Stephen Harper, and Kim Campbell sat together in the Senate to take in the historic moment alongside Mila Mulrooney, widow to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. U.S. President Donald Trump has put a price tag on Canada joining his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system and renewed his annexation threat in the process. Mr. Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that it will cost Canada $61 billion U.S. to join the Golden Dome if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost nothing, quote, if they become our cherished 51st state. He claimed that Canada is considering the offer. Mr. Trump's social media post marked the first time he has leveled his 51st state talks since meeting with Mr. Carney in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. on May 6th. Our correspondent Wyatt Sharp has more on President Trump's Golden Dome price tag.
U.S. President Donald Trump is back with his 51st state rhetoric with respect to Canada after Mark Carney was elected as Liberal leader and subsequently as the Prime Minister. People had thought maybe he was putting a pause to some of that rhetoric because we hadn't seen it for a couple of weeks. Certainly when Mark Carney met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office at the White House in Washington just a few weeks ago, Donald Trump tried to abstain a little bit from that rhetoric, and him and Mark Carney were going back and forth in kind of a more playful way. But on Truth Social now, Donald Trump is renewing the 51st state rhetoric, saying that if Canada becomes the 51st state, they wouldn't have to pay into this Golden Dome system that the United States is looking to implement. It's based off of Israel's Iron Dome, which is basically a kind of air defense system to intercept various missiles and other kind of war weapons that are oftentimes used, things like you're seeing used right now between Israel and Hamas in that war. So Donald Trump wanting to implement something similar, saying that if Canada wants to buy into this and they're not the 51st state, it could cost them upwards of $60 billion. So he's trying to use this as an incentive to get Canada to become the 51st state. Of course, not something that is constitutionally possible, as I've talked about before on the show. In order for that to happen, it would be a constitutional amendment for both Canada and for the United States. In the United States, it would require 2/3 of congressional representatives to vote in favor of it. And then, of course, it would also require a majority of independent state legislators in the state, in half of American states, 25 plus, to vote in favor of this as well. So not something that it's looking like will happen at this particular moment in time, but again, certainly something that Donald Trump would like to happen. And even if it's looking unlikely, that doesn't mean that he's not trying to kind of make some pitches and some more kind of incentives for Canada to follow through with what he wants.
Yesterday, in a historic moment, King Charles III delivered the speech from the throne to open the 45th Canadian Parliament. This marked the first time a reigning monarch has opened Parliament in Canada since 1977. The speech outlined the government's priorities, including economic reforms, housing initiatives, and border security measures. It also emphasized Canada's sovereignty amid rising tensions with the United States.
Many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. Fundamental change is always unsettling. Yet this moment is also an incredible opportunity. An opportunity for renewal, an opportunity to think big and to act bigger, an opportunity for Canada to embark on the largest transformation of its economy since the Second World War. A confident Canada, which has welcomed new Canadians, including from some of the most tragic global conflict zones, can seize this opportunity by recognizing that all Canadians can give themselves far more than any foreign power on any continent can ever take away. And that by staying true to Canadian values, Canada can build new alliances and a new economy that serves all Canadians. The Prime Minister and the President of the United States, for example, have begun defining a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the United States, rooted in mutual respect and founded on common interests to deliver transformational benefits for both sovereign nations.
Following the speech, opposition party leaders shared their reactions as well as expressed some concern to what was mentioned. We're now joined by our news director, David Clement, who's in Ottawa, to break down the throne speech. So, David, I want to start with how significant this event is and what message does it send about Canada's relationship with the monarchy?
Well, I mean, I think the mood right now in Ottawa is it seems like there's a collective sense of unity. All the conversations I've had with people on either side of the political spectrum are walking away from yesterday feeling like there's a sense of national unity that maybe we don't usually experience. And then on the other side, there is a bit of education for people because most people don't necessarily understand the relationship between Canada and the King. I'll give you an example. The Governor General tweeted, I don't think it was a tweet written by her, probably a staffer, about how his trip will strengthen the bonds between Canada and the United Kingdom, as if he was traveling here as some sort of foreign diplomat, failing to realize that he's our king, he's our head of state, he's our sovereign. So it's also created a little bit of a civics lesson for the general public in terms of the role the king plays in a constitutional monarchy.
Now, following the speech yesterday, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre referred to the government's proposed spending as morbidly obese. What are the implications of this criticism, and how might it influence public perception of the Liberal government's fiscal policies?
What's interesting because the Conservatives are in a bit of a rock and a hard place. Um, on one hand, they were criticizing the Liberals for taking their policy positions, zeroing the carbon tax, the cutting the sales tax on new homes. Those things all have a cost, but they were conservative plans as well. And so I think there is a general concern about the size and scope of government. uh, I would say amongst both conservatives and liberals, but it's very hard for the conservatives to really break through on that message right now when what we're talking about for the most part are a lot of policies that the conservatives supported and in fact put up first. And so it's hard to balance saying that the liberals are copying the conservatives and then criticizing the liberals for some of those policies. So it's a tough position to be in.
Well, and yesterday, the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, said that Mark Carney sees himself as the CEO of Canada. What do you make of that comment?
Well, I think he's trying to tap into some of that private sector resentment. Some of the conversations I've had in Ottawa about how Prime Minister Carney conducts himself in closed door meetings. He's incredibly tough, he's incredibly rigid, has high expectations. There are stories now of him reprimanding ministers, almost like calling them into the principal's office and saying, hey, no more mistakes. And so, on one hand, there is some appreciation for that because one of the narratives in the Trudeau era was that government was maybe a little too lackadaisical, let their foot off the gas on a variety of major files, and that's where we end up today. And so, he has a different managerial style, and I think the Bloc Québécois is trying to tap into what we saw in the campaign, where they ridiculed some of his private sector experience, some of the decisions that were made, like Brookfield moving its office and things like that.
Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney has stated that his government will work in partnership with all provinces and Indigenous peoples. How might this approach impact federal provincial relations, especially in areas where there are differing priorities?
Well, it's going to be difficult for them. They're going to have to decide who they want to work with on what. So if they're going to be trying to partner with the NDP, they're going to run into the problem of mirroring what we saw when the NDP had an agreement with Trudeau. And what Prime Minister Carney is the task at hand really is to prove that he's different. It's to prove that this is a new Liberal Party. It's going to be more fiscally conservative, more fiscally conscious, maybe. So if he's going to be partnering with the NDP, that is going to be a tough slog in terms of that narrative and perception. Will he be able to work with the Conservatives? That's still open for debate. We only have just a few weeks before they break for the summer. Still to be determined there. And then working with the bloc again is another one of those. Who knows? It really depends on what the bloc wants. They certainly have more than enough MPs to push the Liberals over the edge on any policy if they supported it.
Now, we do have about a minute, but the throne speech highlighted Canada's sovereignty amid tensions with the United States. And shortly after the speech, President Trump began his 51st state talk again. Do we think that this is calculated?
Yes, I would say it is, because you have to remember that King Charles and Donald Trump are very good friends. And so President Trump would have seen those comments, one, out of virtue of being interested. The administration in DC is interested in Canadian politics for the first time in what feels like forever. But he also would have been interested because they have a great friendship, and the UK has extended the invite for a state visit for Trump to travel to Buckingham Palace and be wined and dined and hosted with the elaborate things that maybe he likes. And so I think it was certainly calculated and deliberate and had an impact.
David, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
A new Equifax report says there is a divide between consumers in the face of economic uncertainty as those missing payments rose compared with a year ago. The report finds 1.4 million people missed at least one credit payment during the first quarter. That's despite the average monthly credit card spend falling by $107 per card holder. The report says total consumer debt grew to $2.55 trillion in the first 3 months of 2025, up 4% year over year. Canada Post and the union representing 55,000 of its workers are set to head back to the bargaining table this week as an overtime ban remains in effect. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says the Crown Corporation has proposed continuing talks for today. It says that Canada Post plans to respond to proposals the union presented on Sunday. Some key issues in the labor dispute include wages and other forms of compensation, along with the potential of more part-time staff and weekend delivery. At least 4,000 people have evacuated their homes and communities due to aggressive wildfires in northern Saskatchewan. The largest group of evacuees has fled the northern village of Pelican Narrows, about 400 kilometers northeast of Prince Albert, where a wildfire burns dangerously close to the community and threatens road access. In northwestern Saskatchewan, leaders in Canoe Lake, about 120 kilometers north of Meadow Lake, decided to evacuate after a fire started very close to the community on Monday. About 250 people have been moved to Cold Lake, Alberta. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has signed an online safety bill that requires companies like Apple and Google to age verify their app stores. Under the new law, minors will need parental approval before they can download apps or make in-app purchases. However, how age verification will work in practice is still a debated issue. The Consumer Choice Center's Stephen Kent has more.
The goal of strengthening child protections in the digital and online world is a very noble one, but one of the things that from a consumer perspective has always concerned us at the Consumer Choice Center is whether or not all consumers are protected in this kind of legislation. Age verification involves both the adult in the life of the child and the minor having to be ID'd, and that creates a huge amount of data privacy and security risks. Another big problem with this is just simple implementation and the ability for younger users who are quite tech savvy to end run around legislation like this. Texas does not exist in an island on its own. They are surrounded by a bunch of other states on every side, where a simple VPN or just going across state lines completely renders things like this useless. On a practical level, what confuses consumer advocates is that this kind of parental ability to guide downloads already exists. If you go onto the iPhone and set up family settings for parents and children, I can already determine what apps are available for download and which ones are not. There was never legislation required for Apple to provide this kind of technology, and the same goes for the Google Store. So lawmakers are always playing catch up here and adding complexity to a system that the market has already provided an answer for.
A commercial kitchen company has been fined $10,000 in connection to an E. coli outbreak at Calgary daycares that saw hundreds of children fall ill. Fueling Minds pleaded guilty in April to 4 bylaw offenses after about 450 people were infected with E. coli in the fall of 2023. 39 children and one adult needed hospitalization. However, parents of some of the hundreds of children who fell ill say the fine against the commercial kitchen that fed the kids isn't nearly enough. One mom, Sarah McDonald, says the fine is nothing compared to the years of health challenges her son will face due to kidney damage. New research highlights an unintended and unfortunate side effect of common drugs. They can cause viruses to spread. Drugs are supposed to help get rid of diseases or at least alleviate the symptoms of them. Many medications can have side effects, but some are particularly serious. Researchers say anti-inflammatory drugs, JAK inhibitors, block an important immune response, which helps infected cells sound the alarm to neighboring cells, slowing viral spread and giving the body time to mount a broader defense. Earlier, I sat down with Dr. Abhishek Rout, medical director at Appletree Medical Group, to discuss this new study. Dr. Rout, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Now, can you explain what JAK inhibitors are and why they're commonly prescribed?
Well, JAK inhibitors, they're a class of medications that work by blocking the Janus kinase enzymes, which we call JAK enzymes, which are really critical players in the signal pathways to regulate our immune system and our immune responses. So by really inhibiting these enzymes, the drugs are effectively reducing the production of the inflammation cytokines that we need, which can also drive chronic inflammation. So what this mechanism does essentially is it makes it useful for autoimmune conditions, because in those cases, the immune system, for reasons we really don't know quite yet, becomes overactive and it mistakenly attacks our body's own tissues. So that's why we use these medications for common conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease. We also use these because they seem to be more convenient. They're more of an oral form of medication.
Now, as you mentioned, many people use
while
this.
A lot of biologic therapies.
Sorry to interrupt, but as you mentioned, many people use this medication for chronic inflammatory conditions like arthritis. How concerned should patients be and doctors be about the potential risk with this new report coming to light?
Right. So when people are taking these JAK inhibitors, I think it's important to really stay alert on the specific red flags that can happen with them. The big ones, especially with this report as well, is the concern about serious infections. So looking for symptoms like persistent fevers or chills or unusual fatigue, and respiratory issues like shortness of breath or coughs. Because in those cases, these JAK inhibitors can dampen that immune response. And what may seem like a minor infection can really escalate quickly if we don't address it promptly. We also look for cardiovascular red flags that patients should really not overlook. Chest pain, shortness of breath, or unexpected swelling in the legs might suggest that there may be some other issues here, sometimes concerns about even blood clots, heart attacks, or strokes.
And what role do infected cells typically play in alerting the immune system? And how are these signals disrupted by these drugs?
So imagine if your immune system is really a network where every signal matters. So when a virus infects a cell, that cell will act like an early responder. It'll alert your body to the danger, and it does that by releasing special molecules called interferons. So the interferon is basically telling everyone else there's a threat here. We need to get ready. And that sends off another pathway called the JAK-STAT pathway. So this is where the JAK inhibitors come into play because they work to inhibit that pathway as well. So oftentimes you use a JAK inhibitor because there's unwanted inflammation and tissue damage. But in many cases, especially in a serious infection, there is wanted inflammation because we want that body to fight against it. So we've got a very delicate balance here. So on one hand, JAK inhibitors can maintain and manage harmful inflammation, but it could also make it too aggressive and remove the unwanted or the wanted inflammation that we need as well.
And are there particular red flags or symptoms that doctors could advise patients on these medications to kind of look out for?
I think the big ones that we do need to worry about are the ones that are more serious. So when we see persistent fevers, chills, very unusual fatigue, so just very, very tired patients, severe cough or shortness of breath, those are very concerning to us. And also cardiovascular issues like chest pains, shortness of breath, and unexplained swelling in the legs. That's what we get concerned about because that could, again, suggest heart attacks, strokes, or even blood clots. So those are very rare that we see, but they are still very critical, and we need to monitor them very carefully.
And are there alternative treatments available that don't suppress the immune system in the same way?
There are alternatives available. We do know that the JAK inhibitors tend to be quite common, but we do have biologic agents as well, like TNF inhibitors and or IL-6 inhibitors, which all play a similar role, but they seem to be more targeted. Instead of blocking, an entire pathway, they will tend to block one specific inflammatory molecule. So it's a much more targeted approach to decreasing inflammation that we do have. We also have drugs called DMARDs like methotrexate or hydroxychloroquine, which we've used for decades to manage arthritis. And they do have a very different pathway and don't directly interfere with this JAK-STAT pathway as well. And then on top of that, we do have the conventional approaches. So physical therapy and an anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle modifications, they can all play a very critical role here in the overall health and bolster the immune system.
And with this report becoming a conversation, how important is it for people to understand the side effects with the medications that they're taking and not just think that it's a really long script on a pill bottle?
Yeah, I think this is the challenge here. I think it's good to understand, and as some of my mentors used to say, there can be a pill for every ill, but there is an ill for every pill. So really understanding the side effects of any medications you're taking is crucial. I think it's important to have a great conversation with it with your doctor or your pharmacist. You understand at least what the common side effects are and what the critical side effects are that you have to look out for. So those are the red flag side effects, and it's good to have that discussion with your provider.
Dr. Rout, as always, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Defense Minister David McGuinty told the CanSec Defense Industry Trade Show this morning that Ottawa will take immediate action to rebuild Canada's military.
Here's the key message I want to leave with you here this morning. This work can only be done in partnership with you. It is work that needs the full spectrum of equipment and services offered in this room, from quantum computing to shields to ammunition. A new government was elected some 4 short weeks ago, and having run on a platform to strengthen Canada's sovereignty and security, your government is moving to take immediate and decisive action to rebuild Canada's defence capacity, rearm the Canadian Armed Forces, and invest in the Canadian defence industry.
His statement comes just a day after the Liberal government signaled in its throne speech read by King Charles that Canada plans to join Rearm Europe, a major European defense procurement pact, in the coming weeks. A transnational defense expert says Canada should try to convince the U.S. that investing more in the military is much harder to do amid a global trade war. A Laval University professor says Ottawa should leverage U.S. President Donald Trump's call for NATO members to hike their military spending and use them to press the case against his tariff agenda. Mr. Trump has said for months that he wants to see NATO countries increase their defense spending budget to the equivalent of 5% of GDP. That's a massive hike from the current alliance target of 2%. Experts say that linking Yukon and BC's power grids will be a game changer, but it will take time. And one of those experts is Jason Donev, a University of Calgary professor, who joined us earlier to unpack why BC and Yukon linking power grids would likely take more than a decade and what factors would play into that duration.
So one of the things that it's difficult for us to understand down here in southern Canada. I mean, I'm here in Calgary, which is very, very southern Canada. Canada goes a whole lot further north than we tend to think of. The distance between where the BC grid stops and where the Yukon grid starts is hundreds of kilometers. So if you know where Toronto is and you know where Quebec City is, imagine trying to cut a path through trees from Toronto to Quebec City or from Vancouver to Calgary, and it's nonstop forest. And with the nonstop forest, you don't have a lot of construction resources and so forth. So all of this has to be brought in. You're off grid. Um, you're bringing your diesel, your workers, and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why it's both so expensive and why it would take so long just to construct. This is also going through various Indigenous territories. Um, and the various communities, the indigenous communities that live within that neighborhood, and not even just cutting through, but adjacent to, are going to have to be consulted. So there's a duty to consult and a duty not only to consult but to collaborate with the local indigenous communities. Um, I This is still early days, but I imagine that both the BC government and the Yukon government are going to want to sit down and engage, not in a cursory, hey, we're doing this sort of way, but in a how can we do this going forward in a good way, starting in a good place.
We also asked Dr. Donev what specific impacts this would have on Yukon and BC communities that would make this a game changer.
The game changer is far more about the Yukon than it is about BC. In terms of the population of the territories, each of the territories, or Yukon specifically, uh, the entire grid for um, for the Yukon is roughly 80, 90 megawatts, which is a medium-sized power plant in BC. So the overall impact in BC, other than actually laying the track to get up there, which is a couple $1 billion project, other than that, the impact to BC is pretty minor. But when you're talking about a remote grid, like what you have up in Yukon, so it's a grid, but it's entirely independent from the rest of the North American grid. So BC has a grid, Alberta has its grid, and there are interties. So while those are separate grids, those are tied together in a way that allows BC to sell electricity to Alberta and Alberta to sell electricity to BC. So if we've got too much or we need a little more, that can flow back and forth. But BC and Alberta are basically the same size. Yukon being much, much smaller gets to take advantage of the extensive network of BC's grid. So at the moment, Yukon is relying extensively on hydropower. Well over half, something to the tune of 2/3, maybe even 3/4, depends on how you look at the numbers, kind of thing. They're certainly doing wind, they're certainly doing solar, but then when they hit the capacity for that, they're then left with liquefied natural gas, they're left with diesel. Getting them on BC's grid can allow them to get off of the diesel, which has to be brought in, right? Like they don't have a lot of local diesel production. So the diesel's being brought in from a far ways away. This means that the limitations on Yukon's power grid go away or at least dramatically reduce. This provides a lot of opportunities for an industrial base to build up in Yukon. This allows for a lot more population growth because Yukon is actually anticipating a significant population growth over the course of the next 15 years. This intertie would allow that population growth to have access to the electricity that they want, but would also allow a lot of industry that requires a significant electrical infrastructure to build up at the same time.
After back-to-back explosions, SpaceX launched its mega rocket Starship for the 9th time on Tuesday evening. But the rocket fell short of the main objectives when the spacecraft tumbled out of control and broke apart. The 403-foot rocket blasted off on its 9th demo from Starbase, SpaceX's launch site at the southern tip of Texas. SpaceX later confirmed that the spacecraft experienced a rapid unscheduled disassembly or burst apart. The company said that in an online statement, quote, "Teams will continue to review data and work toward our next flight test." The International Olympic Committee said on Tuesday that Russian teams, including the country's powerful hockey side, remain banned from competing at the Olympics next February as part of sanctions imposed following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The IOC was responding to reports out of Russia that hockey officials from the country had held talks with the International Ice Hockey Federation over Olympic participation. The IOC suspended the Russian Olympic Committee in October 2023 for recognizing regional Olympic councils for Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. The Indiana Pacers moved within one win of their first NBA Finals appearance in 25 years with a 130-121 victory over the New York Knicks in Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals last night.
Here we go. Goes on top. It's Toppin for three. Good! That'll do it.
Tyrese Halliburton delivered a historic performance, recording a triple-double with 31 points, 11 assists, and 10 rebounds. His 31 points marked a career high in the postseason, and he became the first player in franchise history to achieve a playoff triple-double. Halliburton's all-around brilliance has been a catalyst for the Pacers throughout the series. And over to the NHL, Leon Draisaitl and Corey Perry each had a power play goal and an assist as the Edmonton Oilers took a commanding 3-1 series lead in the Western Conference Final with a 4-1 victory over the Dallas Stars last night.
Across to McDavid, down to Nugent Hopkins. He'll score! Second power play goal, and the Oilers back in front.
It was Ryan Nugent Hopkins' fourth consecutive multi-point performance, becoming the first player in 35 years to accomplish that feat in a conference final, and the first Oiler to have 9 or more points through the first 4 games of a conference final since Wayne Gretzky 37 years ago. After the game, Corey Perry spoke to reporters about Nugent Hopkins' playoff performance.
You know, he's done everything that you can ask. He's put in the work, and you know he's getting rewarded. And you know, everything he's touching is making good plays. And you know, he plays on both sides of the puck. He works as hard as anybody on the ice, and I mean, you know, what he's doing out there, it just helps us out a lot.
The Oilers are now 9-0 in Game 4s over their past 3 playoff runs. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on X and TikTok. Good night, Canada.